Of all the souls he would embody, and all the villains he would face, there was one man Jack Elam was said to despise above all others. His story, a journey into the heart of Hollywood's Shadowlands, began on November 13, 1920, with the birth of William Scott Elam in Miami, Arizona. He would become one of Hollywood's most indelible character actors, a face etched into the very memory of cinema. From his earliest years, a nascent gift for storytelling and performance began to stir within him traits that would one day define a long and celebrated pilgrimage through film and television. But before the silver screen, the world itself was a stage of conflict. He served his country in the United States Navy during the Second World War. There, amidst the vast, unforgiving ocean, a certain discipline and resilience were forged, qualities he would carry with him as he pursued the craft of acting at the University of Southern California. It was his appearance that first captured the gaze of Hollywood, a striking, unforgettable visage marked by a distinct, misaligned eye that set him apart from the polished idols of the era. What could have been a barrier, he masterfully transformed into his greatest asset, a physical signature that could project an aura of pure menace or an unexpected quirkiness. It became his trademark, burned into the celluloid. His career would stretch across more than 5 decades, during which he would breathe life into over 200 roles on both the large and small screen. He found his natural habitat in the Western, a genre that seemed born from the same rugged earth as his persona. His unconventional features and a presence that commanded attention were immortalized in films like Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968 and Support Your Local Sheriff in 1969. And with The Night of the Grizzly in 1966, his legend as the quintessential screen villain was carved into stone. Yet, to see only the villain was to miss the artistry. Elam often laced his portrayals with a surprising, dark-edged humor, a complex humanity simmering just beneath the surface. Audiences found themselves captivated, not merely by the menace he projected, but by the subtle glimmers of a fractured soul he allowed them to see. This depth made him an unforgettable force in every frame he ever occupied. But to cage him within the confines of the Western would be to misunderstand the artist entirely. Jack Elam possessed a remarkable range. He moved with a surprising grace between genres, appearing in comedies that showcased his wit, dramas that revealed his depth, and even films made for the whole family. He proved, time and again, that his immense talent could not be contained by typecasting. His work alongside the other screen giants of his time spoke volumes of his quiet professionalism and of the profound respect he commanded within the industry. Elam's presence on television was just as powerful, with iconic roles in series like Gunsmoke and Bonanza, The Twilight Zone, and The Lone Ranger, where he wove his unforgettable face into the very fabric of American popular culture. In the years 1974 to 1975, Jack Elam took on a curious role, that of Zach Wheeler in The Texas Wheelers, a fleeting but noteworthy comedy series that flickered briefly on ABC. In this tale, Elam was a ghost from the past, a rough-hewn, long-lost father who materializes back into the lives of his children following the death of their mother. The narrative was built around Zach's clumsy, unorthodox attempts to raise 4 children who were, to him, perfect strangers. The part was a revelation, giving Elam a rare stage to display not just his sharp comedic instincts, but his capacity to play a man who, for all his jagged edges, possessed a surprising, buried reservoir of heart. The series burned out after only 8 episodes, yet it was significant for pairing Elam with stars on the verge of ascent, among them a young Mark Hamill, who stood at the precipice of galactic fame as Luke Skywalker, and the intense Gary Busey. And even though The Texas Wheelers vanished into the television ether, a casualty of low ratings, critics had seen something special in Elam's performance. They recognized that his weathered persona and eccentric energy brought a layer of profound authenticity to the familiar landscape of the family sitcom. But for Elam, the search for unconventional roles continued, a testament to his deep desire to push beyond the gritty, weather-beaten archetypes of the Western villain that had so powerfully defined the first chapter of his career. Then, in 1979, he stepped into a role so unexpected it seemed to belong to a dream, appearing in the CBS sitcom Struck by Lightning as Frankenstein's monster. The peculiar comedy centered on a scientist who uncovers a shocking lineage. His ancestor was the infamous Dr. Frankenstein, and through a cascade of strange events, finds himself cohabitating with the creature himself. With a face etched by character and an off-kilter charm, Elam was a choice that seemed destined for such a peculiar role, effortlessly merging comedy with the sheer absurdity of placing a monster of legend within the confines of a light-hearted sitcom. But fate, it seemed, was not on its side. The show flickered out after a mere 3 episodes, a ghost in the ratings, leaving the final 8 episodes unseen by American eyes. Yet, across the Atlantic, a curious epilogue was written. All 11 episodes would eventually grace the screens of the United Kingdom in 1980, offering British viewers a glimpse into Elam's strange comedic experiment, a performance that remains a fascinating footnote in the tapestry of his long career. But Elam was not one to fade away. As the 1990s dawned, he continued to find new stages for his remarkable versatility. He stepped into the role of Hick Peterson, a guest spot in the inaugural season of a cultural phenomenon, the sitcom Home Improvement. The episode, titled Birds of a Feather Flock to Taylor, Season 1, Episode 20, became a quiet summit of giants, giving Elam the chance to share the screen with another titan of the silver screen, Ernest Borgnine. The narrative itself was a playground for eccentric personalities, their orbits colliding humorously with Tim Allen's All-American Taylor family, and Elam's performance served as a powerful reminder that the razor's edge of his comedic timing had lost none of its sharpness. For those who could only picture him as a sun-scorched outlaw squinting into the horizon, witnessing him conjure laughter in a contemporary family living room was a revelation, a testament to the sheer breadth of his artistry on the grand stage. Elam's journey into comedic eccentricity would soon reach a new, surreal peak with his role as Dr. Nicholas Van Helsing, a self-proclaimed crazed proctologist, in the 1981 action comedy juggernaut, The Cannonball Run. It was a film helmed by Hal Needham, a spectacle built from an all-star ensemble, a constellation of names that included Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, and Farrah Fawcett, all thrown into a chaotic, coast-to-coast automotive melee, fueled by slapstick and populated by larger-than-life figures. Yet Elam's turn as the bizarre doctor emerged as one of the film's most wonderfully unhinged highlights, a masterclass in transforming even the smallest of roles into something unforgettable. So indelible was his creation, in fact, that Elam was called back to reprise the role 3 years later in the sequel, Cannonball Run 2, in 1984, once again, electrifying audiences with his wild-eyed mania and glorious unpredictability. Then, in 1986, Elam's path took another strange turn, leading him to the Aurora Encounter, a film that defies simple labels, a weird western born from the strange marriage of frontier justice and science fiction. In this curious production, Elam became Charlie Hankins, the town drunk, his frayed presence perfectly weaving into the film's peculiar, off-kilter tapestry. But it was not the role that would define this film for him. It was on this very set that something far more profound, a connection that would echo through the rest of his days, was forged. There, he met Mickey Hayes, an 11-year-old Texas boy living with progeria, a rare and cruel condition that accelerates the hands of time. Separated by decades and circumstance, the grizzled actor and the young boy formed a bond that was nothing short of extraordinary. Their friendship became the heart of a 1987 film, I Am Not a Freak, which revealed the depth of their connection and showed the world how Elam's own warmth and humanity shone through off-screen just as brightly as his charisma ever did on-screen. Elam once remarked, in a quote that has become legend, a sentiment that has echoed through the years, "You know, I've met a lot of people, but I've never met anybody that got next to me, like Mickey." This remarkable relationship peeled back the layers, revealing a tender, compassionate soul, a side of Jack Elam that his on-screen villains had always kept hidden. In that very same year, his professional life continued its own journey, as Elam once again expanded his television footprint by taking a co-starring role in the comedy series Easy Street. He was cast as Alvin Bully Stevenson, a man whose fortunes had long since run out. the uncle of Lonnie Anderson's character, L.K. Maguire. The show's premise was built on an unlikely collision of worlds, where a wealthy socialite, portrayed by Anderson, opens her lavish home to her blue-collar relatives, sparking a constant flame of comedic conflict. Elam's character, a figure of bumbling yet endearing charm, became the natural heart of the show's humor. And though Time's Easy Street Times was a fleeting moment on the airwaves, Elam's presence undeniably elevated the sitcom, his pairing with Anderson creating a fascinating dynamic between polished Hollywood glamour and a rough, authentic charm. Then, in 1988, Elam shared the screen with country music icon Willie Nelson in a made-for-television western called Times Where the Hell's That Gold? The film, which also featured Delta Burke, was a comedic western romp, a tale of treasure hunts, double-crosses, and personalities as vast as the frontier itself. The role was a return to familiar ground for Elam, allowing him to ride back into the western landscape, but with the distinct comedic twist that had become his signature. His chemistry with Nelson was a key part of the film's appeal, as both men brought a relaxed, almost effortless energy to their performances. Elam's long and distinguished career would receive its highest honor in 1994, the year he was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This distinction placed him in a pantheon alongside the most legendary names in the history of Western film and television. The induction was a profound and fitting tribute to an actor who had defined himself through unforgettable, often villainous, and brilliantly comic performances, and who had contributed so much to the enduring legacy of the Western genre. For fans and colleagues alike, Elam's recognition in the Hall of Great Western Performers served as the ultimate testament to his versatility, his longevity, and the indelible mark he had left on the soul of American entertainment. When people picture Jack Elam, the image is immediate: the signature wandering eye, the face etched with the lines of 100 stories, and the uncanny ability to steal any scene he occupied, whether as a menacing villain or a wry, comedic old-timer in his later years. But behind the camera, away from the lights, Elam was known as a man who spoke his mind with a stark and unfiltered honesty. He held powerful convictions about nearly everyone he worked with, and one actor, one legend, particularly drew his ire. That man was none other than Gary Cooper, the celebrated, stoic star of classic Hollywood westerns and dramas. Gary Cooper was enshrined as one of the great screen icons of his time, famous for a quiet dignity, an understated style, and the power to convey immense strength with only a handful of words. To millions, he was the very definition of a Western hero, but to Jack Elam, Cooper represented almost everything he disdained about Hollywood's golden age leading men. Elam was convinced that Cooper had been vastly overrated, and that his so-called naturalism on screen was little more than, as Elam once cuttingly put it, standing around and mumbling while everyone else carried the scene. It was a story Elam would tell often, in candid interviews and on quiet film sets, painting a less than flattering portrait of his time with the icon. "Gary Cooper never impressed me," Elam reportedly said. "He was always just there." He would describe how great character actors would pour everything they had into a scene, and Cooper would just mutter a line in that low, famous voice of his, and the critics would call it brilliant. "I never saw brilliance," Elam would state. "I saw a guy who got by on looking good in a cowboy hat." Part of Elam's disdain stemmed from something he saw as a deeper flaw: Cooper's lack of a true work ethic. While Elam, a craftsman to his core, poured his soul into perfecting even the smallest of roles, often the first to arrive on a darkened set, and the last to leave, whispering lines to himself in the fading light. He saw Cooper, in contrast, as a man coasting on the gilded reputation of his own stardom. "If you were to ask me who was lazy," Elam once stated, his gaze unflinching, "I'd say Gary Cooper without a moment's hesitation. The man didn't rehearse. He never pushed. He didn't seem to care if a scene had life, if it crackled with energy. He just wanted to walk through it, say the lines, and collect his check. All the while, the rest of us were sweating bullets, trying to breathe life into the thing." But for Elam, the grievance ran deeper than just professional pride. It was about the fundamental way Cooper carried himself among his peers. While the public saw a polite, reserved icon, Elam's perspective, from the trenches of the set, was starkly different. They called him a gentleman, Elam would later recall, a note of cynicism in his voice. And maybe he was, if you ran the studio or were a beautiful starlet. But if you were a working stiff like me, a character actor, he looked right through you. You were scenery, and for that, Elam declared, I have zero respect for a man like Jack Elam, who measured a person's worth by their decency to everyone, from the director to the man sweeping the floor. This brand of cold indifference was the ultimate sin. But perhaps the deepest cut was watching the world celebrate what Elam saw as hollow. He watched critics and audiences alike heap praise upon Cooper, even for performances Elam considered utterly vacant. Cooper's Academy Award for Time's High Noon Times was, to him, one of the great illusions in the history of cinema. You could have propped a wooden Indian in that part, Elam scoffed, and you would have gotten the exact same performance. But because the name was Cooper, the world genuflected. I never could wrap my head around it. With his trademark candor, Elam once distilled his entire thesis into a single devastating metaphor. Gary Cooper was wallpaper. He was just there, filling a space. You didn't even notice him until somebody pointed him out. And yet, this man becomes a legend of the silver screen. To me, he concluded, that speaks volumes about Hollywood's obsession with a handsome face over genuine, hard-won talent. Despite the bitterness of his critique, Elam understood the machinery. He acknowledged Cooper's legion of fans and the public's insatiable hunger for that tall, silent archetype he embodied. But understanding the myth didn't mean he had to approve of it. Sure, he was the all-American hero, Elam conceded, but only because that's the story people desperately wanted to believe. He wasn't the finest actor, not by a country mile. Hell, he often wasn't the best actor in his own pictures. But he had the look, and for the men in the suits, that was always enough. In the final analysis, Jack Elam's condemnation of Gary Cooper was a symptom of a much larger malady, his lifelong battle with a system that worshipped its leading men, while ignoring the seasoned, gritty character actors who gave the films their very soul. To Elam, Cooper was the golden statue representing that profound imbalance, the inherent unfairness of a world that prized aura over artistry, sweat, and substance. And for a man like Jack Elam, who built a legacy from nothing but sheer force of will and an unwavering, blue-collar work ethic, that was a transgression he could never, ever forgive. Away from the camera's glare, Jack Elam was married twice. First, to Jean-Louise Hodgert from 1937, a bond that held until her tragic death from colon cancer on January 24, 1961. A mere 7 months later, in August of that same year, Elam found love again with Margaret M. Jennison. Theirs was a lasting union, spanning 42 years, until October 20, 2003, when Jack's own heart gave out, and he passed away from congestive heart failure in their quiet home in Ashland, Oregon.